A dark road with no street lights, and the car coming the other way has its beams set too high. You look away, the way you always do, and the light lands anyway. For a moment the road is gone, replaced by a pale smear hanging exactly where you were looking, and you keep driving through it, waiting for the white line to come back. Then it returns, and you carry on, and the whole thing leaves your mind before the next bend. That interval has a length. It is measured in laboratories, it has a name, and it varies enormously between people whose eyes are equally healthy. Some drivers get the road back in about 6 seconds. Some wait more than 30. Same eyesight on the chart, same prescription, and a 6-fold gap in how long they travel blind. What sets that number sits in a patch of your retina smaller than a grain of rice. It is made of 3 pigments, and 2 of them arrive there from food you ate. The third is stranger than the first 2, and it has to wait, because the pigments only make sense once the problem they solve is on the table. The number comes first. A sensation with a measurement attached becomes a property of your body, as real as your height, and this one has been a property of yours for as long as you have driven at night. None of what follows needs writing down. The practical side of this channel is collected as 55 illustrated protocols, each with the science behind it, in a manual linked in the description. I will not mention it again. Photostress recovery time, that is the laboratory name for the interval on the dark road. A bright light is held on the eye for a few seconds, then a clock runs until fine detail can be resolved again. Across healthy adults, the average lands near 12 seconds. Around it, the spread covers the whole gap you just met. Age and glasses explain none of it. A wall chart at the optician says nothing about any of this. It tests how small a letter you can resolve in steady light, while this measures how fast the center of your retina climbs back after being overwhelmed, and the two turn out to be nearly independent. 2 people can read the same bottom line and still sit at opposite ends of the recovery spread. Nobody checks it at a routine appointment. Clinics do reach for it when something is wrong because the stopwatch localizes disease. After a timed bright light, a struggling macula takes far longer than usual to hand vision back, while a struggling optic nerve barely changes the time at all. A recovery that drags points the examiner to one address. Outside the clinic, your own number hides in plain sight, because the seconds pass while your attention is fixed on staying in your lane, and because nobody ever compares intervals. Your passenger may have had the road back for 5 full seconds while you were still driving through fog, and neither of you would ever know since each of you assumes the other sees what you see. What is actually recovering is worth knowing because you have watched it happen from the inside. Each of your photoreceptors holds a stock of light-sensitive pigment, and every photon it catches spends 1 molecule of that stock, bleaching it pale until fresh machinery restores it. A headlight spends the stock faster than the restocking can run, and the pale smear parked in your view afterwards is a map of your own bleached cells. Watched closely some evening, the smear even changes costume as it fades. It slides from a bright print of the light through violet and green toward nothing, different pigments refilling at different rates and each reporting its progress in color. The wait on the dark road is a restocking time, which only sharpens the question underneath it. White light carries every color at once, so which part of that white glare is doing most of the overwhelming? Now, light arrives in packets, and the energy of each packet climbs as its wavelength shortens. A blue photon near 450 nanometers carries roughly 40% more energy than a red one near 630. So within any white beam, the blue portion hits hardest particle for particle. That is the first reason, and it is the smaller one. The second reason is geometry, and geometry does most of the work. Your eye focuses with one simple lens, and every simple lens bends short wavelengths more sharply than long ones. Camera designers cancel the error by cementing 2 different glasses into a single corrected element. Your eye owns one lens and no second glass. Opticians measure focusing error in dioptries, and the distance between where your eye focuses deep red and where it focuses deep blue spans more than a full diopter, an error the size of a real prescription, built into every healthy eye ever made. Focus gets parked near the middle of the spectrum, in the yellow-green band where daylight is richest and your detail vision keenest. Blue pays for the compromise. When the reds and greens of a scene land close to sharp on your retina, the blue has already come to a focus in front of it and arrives as a spreading disk. That disc is wide enough to wash across great numbers of tightly packed cones at once, each one reporting fog. Every image you have ever seen carries a blurred blue layer laid over a sharp one. You have met the blue layer on its own. Deep blue lettering on a dark shopfront seems to hover and refuse focus however hard you stare, and a string of blue fairy lights goes soft at a distance where the white bulbs beside them stay crisp. The lens has nowhere to put that color, so the fog is the honest image. Your first line of defense never stood a chance either. The pupil clamps down against a beam within a fraction of a second, but its full swing from wide open to pinhole only cuts the incoming light around 16-fold, and the jump from a dark road to an oncoming headlight runs far beyond that budget. Whatever survives the pupil lands on the retina, blue disc and all. Headlamp engineering has been moving against you too. Old halogen bulbs burned yellowish with only a small slice of their output in the deep blue. The newer white lamps that replaced them run far bluer by design. Oncoming traffic really is harsher than the traffic of a few decades ago, and the extra harshness lives almost entirely in the wavelengths that blur. Under an ordinary afternoon, the mismatch mostly hides because blue is a modest share of daylight and your brain edits relentlessly. Against a headlight, there is nothing left to edit with. The beam runs rich in short wavelengths, the disc spreads across the exact patch of retina you were steering with, and the veil you sat inside on that dark road is the blue layer given. For once, enough energy to bury the sharp image beneath it. An optical flaw, this old and this predictable, would seem to invite a fixed optical fix, a filter cut for the troublesome wavelengths, and mounted where the sharp image forms. So does the eye carry one. At the center of your retina sits the macula, and at its heart the fovea, a pit a fraction of a millimeter across that carries everything you would call sharp vision. Every word you have ever read, every face you have recognized across a room, every white line on every dark road, all of it ran through this pit. The rest of the retina supplies context. This pit is the instrument, and then, spread through the tissue directly in front of those central cones, lies a yellow pigment, absorbing most strongly near 460 nanometers, which is where the blue blur does its worst. Early anatomists could see it with the naked eye on the dissection table, a faint golden stain at the center of an otherwise transparent retina, and they named the region for it, the yellow spot. For a while some anatomists dismissed the stain as an artifact of death itself, mere discoloration of dissection. That was roughly the last time anyone called this pigment unimportant. The modern name for the stain could hardly be plainer: macular pigment. Position is the point. Every photon headed for your sharpest cells crosses the fiber layer where this pigment lives, passing through yellow before anything else, so the blue arrives thinned before it can spread. Its layout is a bullseye matching the bullseye of vision itself. Density peaks at the exact center of gaze and thins to almost nothing, a few degrees out, a filter shaped like the thing it protects. A screen matched to the troublesome band, mounted on the inbound side of the detector, is precisely what an optical engineer would specify. Your retina has been wearing one since before you could walk. The lens at the front of the eye takes a share of the blue as well, through a slow chemistry of its own that an earlier discussion on this playlist followed. The filter on the retina is a separate structure, and it was installed by an entirely different route. Here's the detail that makes the design close to a free lunch. The exact center of your fovea carries almost no blue-sensitive cones at all. The finest detail you resolve is built from the red and green channels, with blue painted in from the surroundings, a color that contributes blur to the sharp image while contributing almost nothing to its detail, can be subtracted at nearly zero cost. The filter throws away the fog and keeps the picture. You can even catch a glimpse of yours. A patch of flat white on a modern screen sends out light with a hidden polarization, and the pigment absorbs polarized blue unevenly. So some people staring at such a field notice a faint yellowish bow tie floating at the center of gaze, fading within seconds. That ghost is your own filter, seen by your own retina. Density is measurable through the front of a living eye, and the method is elegant. A blue light and a green light flicker in alternation at the center of gaze. The blue is dialed up until the flickering seems to stop, and the setting reveals how much blue the pigment swallowed on the way in. Nothing touches you in the process. Your own perception, used as the instrument, reads out the thickness of a tissue layer thinner than a sheet of paper. The reading is called macular pigment optical density. Yours is a number, across healthy people. That number spans a range as wide as the recovery times it will turn out to predict. Some retinas wearing a filter several times denser than others behind identical prescriptions. A spread that has to be coming from somewhere. You now know the filter exists, you know where it sits, and you know its thickness can be read through the pupil of a living eye. The question changes here. A fixed piece of anatomy should come out roughly uniform from person to person, the way corneas and lenses do. So what supply line could leave two healthy retinas that far apart? The answer starts in the produce aisle. Around 800 carotenoids exist in the plant world, the pigment family that colors autumn leaves, maize, marigolds, and the flesh of peppers. Your body cannot build one from scratch. Every carotenoid in you was eaten, absorbed, and shipped. And of those 800, just 3 are admitted into the macula. 2 of them appear on nutrition labels, lutein and zeaxanthin, drawn overwhelmingly from dark leafy greens and a short list of yellow and orange foods. The third is going to need a chapter of its own. Entry is ruthlessly selective. Your liver warehouses a broad mix of carotenoids, and beta-carotene reaches your skin readily enough that a season of heavy carrot eating can tint a palm orange, yet none of those relatives is granted entry to the macula. 2 molecules pass. Everything else in the family waits outside. Selection this strict usually marks a tissue that cannot afford mistakes, and the retina is never replaced. You have seen the chosen pair with your own eyes incidentally on most mornings of your life. The yellow of an egg yolk is this pigment duo, banked there by the hen from her feed. One animal's filter material packed as another's breakfast. Both of the chosen pigments earn their place on chemistry. A small oxygen-bearing group at each end of the molecule lets each one stand upright across a cell membrane like a tent pole anchored at both ends, spanning the structure it protects instead of floating loose inside it. Molecules built that way can hold their post in tissue for years, quenching stray energy where they stand. Getting there takes a convoy. Absorbed with dietary fat, the pigments ride the bloodstream aboard cholesterol-carrying particles, and the retina draws its supply from that passing traffic over months, so the filter in your eye this evening reflects a long average of your meals rather than anything you ate this week. The convoy also leaks at every stage. Only a fraction of what a leaf contains survives digestion into the blood, and the retina claims only a share of that circulating cargo. People differ at each handover, in gut, in transports, in uptake, which is part of how identical diets can still build filters of different depths. Delivery started before your first meal. Lutein crosses the placenta, turns up in umbilical cord blood, and flows in breast milk. So an infant's fovea is already collecting its filter months before the infant has ever held a spoon, stocked entirely from someone else's plate. Admission runs on paperwork. The retina holds a dedicated binding protein for each pigment, one that recognizes lutein and another that recognizes zeaxanthin, and the two proteins keep their cargo in visibly different territories. Zeaxanthin owns the very center of the fovea, accounting for the overwhelming majority of pigment there, while lutein spreads more diffusely through the surrounding tissue, a division Lee and colleagues mapped molecule by molecule across donated human retinas. The arithmetic runs lopsided too. Meals deliver several times more lutein than zeaxanthin, yet the center hoards the scarcer pigment, a preference the supply line alone cannot explain. The arrangement reads like intent. The densest optical protection stands over the cells with the most to lose, graded outward from the exact spot you steer, read, and recognize with. No engineer signed the drawing, yet the drawing is what the imaging shows. And every milligram of it rode in on a fork. Well, an unlit road home tends to pick up a private rule once the recovery figures sink in. After every oncoming truck, the speed comes down and stays down, until the white line has fully sharpened again, however long that takes. 2 of the 3 pigments have now been traced to the plate. The third has no plate to be traced to. So what stalks the middle of the bullseye where a third pigment turns up in everyone? Mesozeaxanthin. Chemists searching the human food supply for it come back nearly empty-handed, trace amounts in shrimp shell and in the skin of a few fish, virtually none in the plants that supply the other 2, nothing anyone eats in quantity. Yet everyone measured carries it, densest at the point of sharpest vision. For years its origin stood as an open argument in the field, a pigment on the map with no road leading to it. Your eye builds it, Behind your photoreceptors lies a single layer of dark cells called the retinal pigment epithelium, the maintenance floor of the retina, and one of its resident enzymes is named for the layer that houses it, RPE65. The enzyme has a day job, and the day job is famous. Restocking is its trade. Those bleached molecules of visual pigment from the dark road, the stock every photon spends, come back into service through this enzyme's assembly line, millions upon millions of times a day. Vision runs on its output. Anyone walking from afternoon sun into a cinema has felt the day job at full stretch. For the first minutes, the room is near blackness, and then it brightens on its own, seat by seat, across the following quarter hour. The film never changed. Your pigment stock was being rebuilt beneath you, and the brightening was the restocking made visible. How much the day job matters shows up when it fails. Children born with a broken copy of this enzyme lose useful vision in early childhood, and the first gene therapy ever approved for an inherited eye disease exists to hand working copies back. Medicine has staked real money on this one protein. And the day job turns out to come with a second job. Given lutein, the enzyme performs one further reaction. It shifts a single double bond one position along the molecule's chain and leaves everything else, the shape, the handedness, the whole architecture, exactly as it found it. What emerges from that one small migration is mesozeaxanthin. It travels forward into the fovea and joins the filter at its center. The moonlighting is less surprising than it first sounds because the enzyme's entire career is carotenoid chemistry. The visual pigment it services descends from the very molecular family it is now remodeling. Evidence for that claim deserves saying out loud. In chicken and quail retina and in cultured cells fitted with the human version of the enzyme, lutein goes in and mesozeaxanthin comes out, with this one enzyme doing the converting. A chain of custody Ranganathan and colleagues identified in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Primate work pushes the inference further. Monkeys raised on carotenoid-free diets carry no macular pigment at all, fed pure lutein and nothing else. Such animals grow mesozeaxanthin in their retinas anyway, manufactured somewhere on-site. The geography inside your own eye agrees, moving inward toward the center of the fovea. Lutein's share falls while mesozeaxanthin's rises, step for step, the signature of raw material being consumed on the road to a product. Nobody has watched the conversion run inside a living human eye. The step from bird retina, monkey feeding studies, and cell culture to your fovea is an inference, a strong one, and the published work describes the reaction as slow and sparing rather than abundant, a cottage industry beside the day job, sufficient only because its destination is so small. Two facts stand on firmer ground than any inference. The pigment is present at the center of virtually every human fovea, and the diet did not put it there. From a step back, the design becomes visible. Your fovea's center, the most valuable fraction of a millimeter you own, is furnished almost entirely with the zeaxanthin family. Where the diet's deliveries fall short of demand at dead center, the eye tops up the middle by remaking spinach's most abundant pigment into a cousin no spinach contains. An enzyme hired to keep vision running spends a sliver of its time manufacturing the very filter that shields the cells it serves. There is a dependency hiding inside the trick. The enzyme can only remodel what the diet delivers, so the homemade pigment is spinach twice removed, a manufactured part built from imported material. Even the piece of the filter you never ate began as food on a plate. That sequence deserves a slow reading. A pigment pulled from a leaf, carried in your blood for months, handed to an enzyme working in the dark behind your retina, rebuilt by the migration of one bond into something no meal could supply, and stationed over the cells doing the seeing. 3 pigments, precisely placed, one of them homemade. What remains is the practical question, the one that matters on the road. What does a denser filter actually buy you? Measurement answers first. People carrying denser macular pigment recover from a bright light faster, hold a target visible against brighter veiling glare, and report less discomfort under the same lighting. The glare experiments are refreshingly literal. A small target sits inside a glowing ring. The ring is dialed brighter until the target disappears, and denser pigment eyes keep the target alive at intensities that have already erased it for their neighbors. Part of any glare veil arriving at your fovea is short wavelength light, and a denser filter subtracts a larger share of that veil before detection. That is the mechanism hiding under the statistics. Pooled across the published record by Nolan and colleagues in the journal I, Recovery Speed tracked pigment density at a correlation near -0.57 at the measurement point closest to the fovea, with glare tolerance tracking at around 0.47. In plain speech, the filter lines up with roughly a third of the person-to-person variation in recovery speed, yours included. Plenty of room remains for everything else an eye contains. Still, it is one of the few dials on that number anyone has shown can move at all. Of course, a correlation reports company kept, and company can be kept for many reasons. People who eat more greens differ in a dozen other ways too, which is why the trials carry more weight. Photostress recovery shortened, glare disability eased, and contrast against a blue background improved when lutein and zeaxanthin were supplemented against placebo over months. Double-blind, a result Hammond and colleagues demonstrated in investigative ophthalmology and visual science. The blue background detail is its own small proof of mechanism. A filter that absorbs blue darkens a blue backdrop more than the object in front of it, so the object stands out further, just as an optics bench would predict. Drivers have guessed at this through a full century of yellow-tinted night glasses. Trials find them useless, and the physics explains why. A tint across the whole scene dims the road along with the glare, taxing the dim rod vision a night driver depends on. The retina's own version screens only the tiny central patch where detail is red, leaving the rest of the scene at full brightness. The right filter has to sit inside the eye, and yours already does. Effect sizes stay modest, and the clock runs in months rather than weeks, because a filter is grown molecule by molecule at the pace groceries become tissue. The direction is the prize. Moving the supply line has now been shown to move the interval it feeds. A claim like that attracts bigger claims the way a porch light attracts moths. So the honest edges need drawing before anything practical gets said. Vision already lost stays lost, whatever arrives on the plate. A cataract that has reached the point of surgical conversation belongs with a surgeon, and the disease research on these pigments concerns slowing progression in eyes that still have function, a real result, and a different one from repair. The glare and recovery findings stand on their own evidence, and they are the findings that apply to a person with healthy eyes tonight. Denser filter, shorter blind interval, measured in seconds. The claim is exactly that size, and the evidence carries exactly that claim. So where in the spread does your own number sit? Boundaries first. Night vision that has worsened recently. Halos that are new. Glare that has sharply escalated. Those patterns belong in an examination chair because they can signal cataract, retinal disease, or corneal change that no food addresses. Anyone with diagnosed macular degeneration follows their ophthalmologist's program ahead of any general description. One cheap suspect deserves ruling out before any biology gets blamed. A hazy windscreen or scratch spectacle lenses scatter an oncoming beam across the whole field, imitating a slow filter with nothing but dirt, and a clean windscreen buys back more glare than most interventions ever will. For healthy eyes, the count is free. Once a car is passed and the road is safe, the count to a fully sharp white line is the home version of the laboratory stopwatch, and a handful of counts across a week of ordinary driving settles where you sit in the spread. Comparing like with like matters, since a lifted truck beam and a distant hatchback tax, the retina vary differently. Under 10 seconds sits comfortably in the range. Worth knowing about the test's limits, it reads the fovea and its filter, while seeing into unlit verges, leans on a separate slower night vision system that this count says nothing about. Counts that repeatedly pass 20 are worth a mention at the next eye appointment, offered as information rather than alarm. Whatever the count settles at, knowing it changes the quality of the weight more than its length, a measured number is easier to sit inside than a mystery. Seconds sound small until they are converted into road. At motorway speed, a car covers roughly 30 meters every second, so the distance between the fast end of that spread and the slow end is several hundred meters taken on trust. Now, feeding your filter is a question of density, and density has a clear winner. Cooked spinach and kale carry an order of magnitude more lutein per serving than any fruit. Egg yolk contributes less by weight in an unusually absorbable form, and maize, orange peppers, and goji berries supply meaningful zeaxanthin. Frozen spinach counts just as well as fresh, since the pigment rides out the freezer untouched. Cooking helps rather than hurts here, since heat breaks open the leaf cell walls and hands more of the pigment over to digestion. Blood levels answer within weeks of a change. The retina, drawing on that slow convoy, answers across months. The honest expectation is a quiet one, an oncoming beam that costs a little less road than it used to, noticed only if you thought to count. Fat is the final gatekeeper because these pigments dissolve in nothing else. Carotenoid absorption from a salad rose several-fold when avocado or avocado oil replaced a fat-free dressing, a difference Unlu and colleagues measured in the Journal of Nutrition. A salad eaten dry leaves most of its pigment locked in the leaf. The dressing is part of the delivery system rather than a garnish. The next set of headlights will arrive the same way, and the road will vanish for as long as it vanishes. What returns it, and how quickly, is a yellow patch a few millimeters wide standing in front of the only cells you own for sharp vision. It has stood in the path of every photon your central vision has received, since before you could read. Some of its material has been in place for decades, some was unloaded from a meal this month, and a little of it your eye made for itself, quietly, in the dark behind the retina. Tonight it will do its work a few hundred more times without sending word, and the only thing that has ever fed it is what you put on your plate.